Welcome back to the IO2 Microsolution YouTube channel. In previous video, we saw how to do setup of global configuration and how to read back global configuration. In this video, we will see how the global counter works, which you have set in global configuration. So let's understand how it works. So let's first understand what are the different counters available in IO Flasher. So one type of counter is the block counter. So when you select any block, in that block you have a counter which you can enable or disable, and that counter is called a block counter. And when you program the data stored in that block, the block counter will increase, right? Keep on increasing. So on every successful programming of that block data, the block counter will increase, right? So each block has its own independent counter, and whenever you use that particular block for target programming, that block will increase. The other counter is the global counter. The global counter is the sum of all current counter of each block. So as I mentioned, when you program any block data to the target chip, the counter increase. So that is, when you increase that counter is called a current counter, right? What you have set as a limit, which is, let's say you set 100 limit for the block counter, and now on each successful programming, the block will count from 1, 2, 3, and this value is called the current counter of that block. And global counter is the sum of all current counters of the blocks. So if the counter will increase, the global counter will also increase. So if you have enabled the global configuration and you have set up the counter, or you haven't set up the counter, based on different configuration, these are different scenario. The counters limit works only in offline mode. So if you are doing programming in online mode, none of the counter will increment and no limit programming works, because the limit programming is supposed to be work in offline mode, where you don't want to give access to the hex file to your EMS or production flow, and you have stored the hex file in the IO Flasher programmer. So please keep in mind, this works only in offline mode. Now, based on your different configuration, so you know that there are different blocks that are available in IO Flasher. Based on whatever block number you have selected in your program, if you have enabled the programming, the limit programming for the block, or you have not enabled it, based on that there are different settings. So if you have not enabled the limit programming for the block, and you have also not enabled the global programming for the global limit for the programmer, then there will not be any limiting of the programming. The global counter will not increment, and there will be no limiting of the programming for that particular block, and the global counter will not increase. If you have enabled the block limit programming, and you have not enabled the global programming, the block counter will increase, global counter will not increase, block limit programming will work. So as soon as you reach to the number what you have programmed into the block counter, your will stop, but global limit will not work. If you have not enabled the block limit programming and enable the global limit programming, while your global counter will not increment. So please keep note, if you have not enabled the block programming limit and you have enabled the global programming limit, because you have not enabled the limit programming for the block, that means you don't want to limit the programming of that block. So we have given this flexibility that you can decide any program what you want to not to have any limit, right? It's up to you. And if you enable the limit programming for the given block and also enable the global programming for the programmer, then block counter will increment, global counter will also increment, block limit programming will work and will stop when the block reach to a fixed counter, decided counter, and the global counter will limit counter will also work, and it will limit the programming once the sum of all stored program reached to the global configuration setting. The only one part that you have to keep in mind, the global counter is the sum of the block counters only if the block counter limit is enabled. For example, if you see the third case, you have not enabled the block counter limit and you have enabled the global counter limit. In this case, global counter will not increase. And because you haven't enabled the block limit, the block programming will not be limited, but global counter limit will work based on the counter of other blocks. This will not be adding the block counter of this block as the limit programming is disabled for that block. So for safer side, you can keep the block counter limit and the global limit both enabled so that everything works without any mistake. And in case you want not to limit any particular block from programming, then you can give a higher number in lakhs or millions so that that particular block will not be limited by its own block counter, right? Now let's see a live demonstration of the global counter and the block counters. To see that, let's go to the IO Flasher GUI. Here we have IO Flasher GUI. So we have stored some program in different blocks. So let's first see the programs where we have. So the block counter for block 0, 1 and 2 are enabled, while the block counter for block 3 is disabled. Now let's go and program the device. So right now block 0 is selected in the programmer. Let's go and hit the start button. And you can see the programming is successful. Let me make it a bit bigger for you. And you can see the counter is now 1. Let's again program the device. Counter is 2. So if I go and read back the chip counter, you can see chip counter is 2. Global counter is also 2. Let me do the programming once more. And you can see the counter is 3. I will read the chip counter and the global counter. And both are 3. Now let me change the program from the program button. And I am selecting the another program. So I am selecting program 1. Earlier it was program 0. I am selecting program 1. Now I have selected program 1. And if I read the chip counter, you can see the chip counter is 0, the global counter is still 3. Now let's program the block 2. Successful. You can see the counter value is 1. I will read chip counter is 1 and the global counter is 4 because it added 1 into the previous block counter. Again program it. You can see it's 2. And then I read back, it's 5. Now again I am changing the program to program next program, which is program 2. I will read the chip counter, it's 0, global counter is 5. Let me press the button, it's 1. You can see chip counter is 1 and global counter is 6. Let me do again, and you can see the global counter limit reached, because I have programmed the global counter limit as 6. So if you go back to your global counter and you read the global counter, you can see the limit was 6, right? Now you will not be able to program this program. You can see global counter reached. Escape. Let me select back the previous one. Again, you can't do this. Select back the program 0. You can see 3 counter is there, which we programmed before. Again, same issue. Now let me select program 3. This counter, this program before. Now let's program this. You can see this is successfully programmed. Correct? Why? Because we have not set the limit for this block. As I mentioned, we haven't set the limit for block number 3. So if we change back the program to block number 2, you can see we programmed 1 count before, and let's do it again. You can see global counter limit error. And if we again select, let's say block 1, you can see counter to what we have programmed before. Again, same global counter limit. And if I select back block 3, then you will see. So you can program as many program as you want, as you have not set any limit for this program, right? Thank you from IoT Micro Solutions. Stay tuned. We will come with more videos in future.